It's an honor of mine to introduce Joanne. She and I met a few months ago when I was interviewing her for the VR Association podcast. I do think what she is doing is truly driving impact in very unique ways. So, on that note, take it away, Joanne.
So thank you very much for the invite. And I'm starting because just recently I actually defended my PhD. So my name is Joanne Popinska, and very recently I've defended my PhD thesis at Polish National Film School in Łódź about new forms of narratives in virtual reality. And today I will briefly present my work that is a part of this thesis, which is VR documentary, The Choice. And just so you know, my PhD is in the field of film directing, so I am looking at VR through the film director's lens. And in my thesis, I've analyzed the new forms of narrative used by directors who choose this medium and the reasons why filmmakers decide to use VR to tell their stories. Because as you know, VR is still very young from filmmakers' perspective. I know I keep hearing voices that, oh my God, it's been already 10 years and where the technology is. From filmmakers' perspective, it is still very fresh, very young, and we are just starting exploring this medium. And it's also very challenging and demanding, but it very much opens up a lot of new and exciting possibilities in the narrative. It also, I think, allows to create a much more direct relationship with the viewer in comparison to what the traditional cinematography offers. And this was extremely important to me when I was working on The Choice. And with my thesis, my school, so it's a first doctorate about VR in Poland. And my goal was to also organize the knowledge a little bit before diving deeper into my own research and creation. And I also look closer into the narrative strategies filmmakers use to engage the audience. And then I describe my own work and research that I performed while working on the Choice project. And you keep hearing Poland, Poland, Poland. So it is in Polish. And my school have offered publishing this thesis in a form of book. And we're currently working on making it happen. So it should be accessible soon, but first in Polish. And then I very much hope that we will translate it to the English version. And now a few words about myself. So as a director, I'm working with the VR medium myself, and I'm also a founder of the VR production company, Infinite Frame Media, together with Tom Hall. And I come from Poland. Currently, I live in Canada, and I came here at the height of the popularity of stereoscopic filmmaking because my background is 3D filmmaking. But as you all know, 3D died, and like many other creators, I pivoted pretty naturally into VR. The same comes for my partner and co-founder, Tom Hall. He also started as 3D specialist, and he transitioned to VR through 360 video. And we were seeing the strengths of virtual reality, but we quite quickly realized that 360 video is not what's interesting for us, and we focused on 60OF environments. So we wanted to capture authenticity, and 360 video honestly is very limiting in this aspect. And the one more important thing about our team is that we combine the creative and technological aspects. So we interlace those two, and we work on how the technology can carry the story. So we are film production company with heavy balance between the technology and creativity. And our first tests with VR, so my thought process around the potential of VR started with experiments. So we played with this first-person perspective. We filmed some images with the camera operators' hands in frame and the camera on their head. And then we were just showing it to the viewers. And we realized how deep connection people felt. And it was really interesting because they assumed that the body that they could see was their own. And even if we didn't even add any interactivity, so people couldn't do anything, but the reactions were truly fascinating because they felt that this is really them. So they felt this deep connection. And this is when we decided to analyze this trend deeper and research how this first-person approach can be used further in VR to connect the audience with what they are seeing. And this is where the early the initial idea for the Choice project came from. So the Choice is an immersive, interactive documentary where I invite the audience to have a personal conversation with a woman who have decided to have an abortion. And in the Choice, we put the audience in front, eye to eye with this person, so they can feel as though they were having conversation with her. And there are two main subjects of this experience. First, the most obvious one is abortion, but the other one is probably even more important, and this is stereotypes. These are stereotypes and what is needed to break them. And my interest for undoing stereotypes comes from my training as a sociologist. This is my first field of practice, and documentary filmmaker, and now new media VR creator. And I will talk about this undoing stereotypes in a second, and first I will tell you a little bit more about the project. So for this project, we have filmed a handful of interviews. The last two we actually filmed in last March in Austin, Texas, and it happened literally just before the COVID pandemic. There is some crazy story about our travel back and borders being already closed. So we filmed those last two stories in Texas, and it's very interesting because we covered aspects of abortion that are now, this day, at the top of the reproductive rights debate, especially in Texas. I don't know if you heard, but recently abortion was pretty much banned in Texas completely. So currently we're finishing working on this first chapter with Kristen, so the second lady that you will see in a second. And Kristen is a young Native American woman from Texas, and she found herself in an unhealthy pregnancy, and she had to make a very tough decision while the doctors hide some crucial information from her. And from the first view, it seems to be a story about this unhealthy pregnancy and terminating it due to medical reasons. But as the story unfolds, the audience learns much more about this young woman and what happened. And then it becomes a story about trauma, about stereotypes, and about the decision being taken away from her, which could have and does have very tragic consequences for her. And the Choice presents a very innovative approach to the narration in a documentary film. So I'm inviting the viewer to have a virtual conversation, to have a dialogue, and where the viewer becomes an active participant. As a director, I ask whether it is possible to change the relationship between the viewer and the work of art in VR. And if it happens, how it can affect the viewer and their reception of the work. And my goal was to create the situation in which the viewer would have the impression of a conversation. And it was very important for me that it's not only that you are taking part in a conversation, but on the other side of this conversation, that there is a real, living, breathing person, and this conversation could be taking place in the real life. And to create this experience, we had to decide what techniques we will use. So how to tell this story, what will be the audience's role, how much interactivity we want to introduce, when it's too little and when it's too much. So when it becomes a game, not the narrative experience, and how to keep control on the story and allow the audience to shape it in their way, but to sort of navigate them towards the ending that I wanted them all to experience. And so these were all the questions that we needed to find an answer for. But before this happened, we had to make one crucial decision about how to even film it. And from the beginning, we knew that we want to have the 6DOF environment, and we started with testing some existing technologies at the moment. I think it was 2018. And we tested both the high-end stuff like volumetric stages and very rudimentary like depth kits and solutions like that. But none of the existing technologies produced the effect that was very, very important to me. Because what I wanted to achieve is to create a very strong feeling of being together in the same space with another human being. And we did a series of tests, and then we realized that to achieve that, we actually need two elements. So first is this 6DOF, which I already mentioned, and volumetric capture method could provide this effect. But the second element is stereoscopy. and there was no solution that could offer both. And why stereoscopy? Why it's so important? So stereoscopy is something that allows you to see certain light, I call it life, in people's eyes. And this happens due to an effect called retinal rivalries. So each of your eyes, of your two eyes, sees something slightly different than the other. And what happens is when seeing with two eyes, it reveals certain qualities in one eye then the other doesn't perceive. And it's easiest to notice when you observe some highlights. So for example, if you have a glass in front of you now, then just look at it and like keep closing your eye, like left eye, right eye very quickly, and observe how the highlights change on this glass. And this is because each of the eyes looks from slightly different perspective, and this tells your brain that is being trained throughout your whole life. It tells something about the surface, about what is in front of you. And if you remove those disparities, like in volumetric capture technologies, especially those based on photogrammetry, you end up with the impression that something is made out of clay. There is no light, there is no life in it. So together with Tom Hall, with my partner, we created our own capture strategy. We combined this volumetric and stereoscopic capture to reintroduce those artifacts. And as a result, the person's face feels much more like a living person, less like some Star Wars hologram. And it actually took us several years to create it, and it was an extremely complicated and challenging process, but definitely worth the result, because our viewers very often emphasize how natural her presence feels for them and how natural the whole experience appears to be because of her presence. And one other very important aspect of this technology was that we wanted also to travel to our subjects. So we didn't want to have them sit in these huge volumetric stages. We wanted to go to them, sometimes even to their houses, and to record them so they could feel natural and relaxed. And the resulting process is at once more complex and realistic than other solutions, but it's also mobile and very easy to set up, and that was huge for us. And I'm showing you some preview here, but on a flat screen it of course does not come across. So if you want to see it, please reach out to me and I can share some beta version of the Choice project with you. All you need is Oculus Quest headset and I will share it with you. So to summarize, the stereoscopic volumetric capture was one important aspect, but there was, of course, much more to design this experience. And I mentioned at the beginning that the Choice is a project about stereotypes and undoing them. But how can one undo a stereotype? And I focus here on two key factors, drawing from my sociologist and documentary experience. First, and VR. First aspect is presence, second is proximity. So presence relates to the sense of being there, and it's very well-known phenomenon for VR, in VR. And proximity is the physical distance that correlates with mental distance. So, for example, when you talk to people, when you allow them in your personal space, it's also how we think about people. So we say that somebody is close to us, and like, for example, your friend or your husband, and we allow them to be much closer in the space, and the stranger, we allow them a bit farther. And even now we are sitting in virtual space, but we are approaching some people that we know closer, and some that we are just starting getting to know, we're a little bit farther away. And this is also the basis of our social interactions. It tells a lot to our brain how we treat people if we allow them closer. And I use this phenomenon by putting Kristen. It also does not come across on this slide because she seems to be sitting very far from you, but when you put the headset on, she's literally a meter from you. And this is the distance to which we allow only friends, only close people. And this is very important when working with the stereotypes, because I think that the best way to work with them is often to meet in person. And presence and proximity combine to encourage compassion, as they affect how our brain reads the situation. So suddenly you are sitting 1 meter away from her, and your brain reads it that she is afraid, she's your friend if you allowed her such close. And now, with her sharing her personal story, you stop seeing a documentary. It's not a presentation. It's not even a conversation with an activist, because she's sharing the story for the first time. It is very raw and very emotional. That was this was one other aspect of my interviews. So when I was looking for interviewees, I made a note that I want to talk to people who are not activists, who did not share this story yet with anybody else other than their families. So I wanted them to go through the whole process of discovering the story for themselves and for the audience in front of the camera. So, and it's the same way how your friend would do it if she was talking to you, also going deeper and deeper into her own emotions. So my goal with this project, however, was not to change what people think about abortion, but rather how. And the choice with recreating the situation of meeting someone and having this conversation does it on mechanical level. So it works by having users select from this question that I present you, and it allows them to steer the discussion in a number of directions. And on this visual and mental level, that functions by having you, the interviewer, and her, the interviewee, face to face, as you would do when speaking to anyone in the real life. The approach I adopted for the choice is that I don't give users a fake backstory to contextualize their experience. So I want you to enter and to have this conversation as yourself, with your identity, with your consciousness, and with your own thoughts. And I want you to be aware that I have invited you directly. And a good comparison and a little bit different situation would be how Asad Malik dealt with it with his Terminal 3. I don't know if you know this project. In this experience, it's AR experience. You are asked to become an interrogator at the border, and you make decision on whether to allow somebody into US after a brief conversation with them or not. And I didn't want you to think with the choice that you are someone else and that you have to imagine who that person is. I wanted you to know that you are the part of this conversation, whether you have a personal connection to the story or not. So in the experiences where you are asked to play some role, it's then not you making decisions, it's the role you are playing, which means that there's no there is an emotional separation from the process, which sometimes can of course be good, but for the choice, we realized that if you put on the headset to watch this project, you have already made the decision to be a part of this conversation, and you don't need to take on a fake role. So you are interacting as yourself with a real person and a real story. Then the viewer in the choice takes a first-person perspective with a very gentle embodiment. So when you're selecting the questions, you see the shape of your hands, but nothing more. So that's it. And another aspect is that Kristen, the protagonist, is looking directly at you, at the viewer, and she acknowledges your presence, she speaks directly to you, she introduces you to this world and makes you a part of it. And the way we achieved it is we filmed it so that I was sitting right behind the camera, and thanks to which she keeps looking at someone, at me, and she does not stare into the void. She felt my presence all the time. And initially, when I was designing the experience, I was thinking about giving the viewer the frame, the story, some specific role, but I have come to the conclusion that my goal is not to create the staging, but rather inviting you with your own identity and with the feeling that you are a participant of this conversation. And then what's even more important, that after this experience, you are returning to your real life, and you're taking this experience, this conversation with you. But it's not a famous or infamous empathy machine. I'm not a huge fan of this wording of what I'm doing. I prefer to talk about compassion and understanding because the most important thing for me is for people to realize that their own point of view is not the only one that exists, and it's only one of many possible. And I wanted to make people start thinking and I don't try to make you put someone else's shoes like many experiences do. And I could talk about it longer. I don't think we have time for that. But what I want for you is to simply be there with her and not to become some character in the movie. And then when you sit there, I want you to listen to her, to talk to her, and then slowly or suddenly, both of that, the psychological effect takes place thanks to this presence, to proximity, and also thanks to your active participation. So what happens is your understanding is changing, but not through walking in someone else's shoes. It's rather by talking to someone and not reading news, not reading some articles, but talking to a real person. In the choice, the viewer becomes an active participant, and this feeling, we make it stronger with the filming method and also the way we have constructed the experience. So I have combined, as you see, this very realistic stereoscopic volumetric video with spatial animations, and those animations allow the viewer to somehow enter into the realm of memories and thoughts of the protagonist, Kristen. So here, for example, is the room that she was making ready for the baby. And I will talk more about the illustrations in a second. But going back to the user's perspective, there is another aspect of it. So you start, this is the initial scene, opening scene. So you start as yourself, talking to Kristen, and you're listening to what she's about to say. But then at some point, you are taking this first-person seat and it's becoming your own story in a crucial moment of the story. So at some moment, the experience becomes more active, Kristen disappears, and you are literally driving to the abortion clinic, and people refer it that they started thinking at that moment what would happen to them. And I used this change in perspective to ground you not only in this conversation, but to make you start thinking, what if this was happening to you? What your thoughts would be? And in this moment, I also use movement. So before, like in this room, for example, the animations move delicately, but with this perspective shift moment, they become much more dynamic. So you literally are driving through the city into the clinic. And I did it to underline how different moment this becomes and how different your role has become there. And then, not to spoil, but to spoil a little, yes, then I bring Kristen back and I put you back with the conversation with her. And this is like, when you watch the choice, you will see why I'm changing this perspective and what is the psychological effect on that. Now a little bit more about the illustrations. So their most important role is that they allow the viewer to see what's unspoken. So we can visualize the world of Kristen thoughts and feelings and memories, and the viewer can, in a sense, feel them and penetrate them with their mind. But they also allow me to build space and use the full spectrum of space, which is of great importance for building an emotional bond. But I also give the viewer an opportunity to look away from Kristen. So I even encourage you sometimes to look around. And this way I give you a very much needed mental space, because her presence is very strong. And even in like everyday conversation, when we talk to friends, to somebody, we sometimes look away and dive into our own thoughts. So this is the role of these illustrations as well. And there is one more aspect. So I very much believe that VR is not and should not be an imitation of reality. I don't think it's supposed to pretend that it is real. And the illustrations allow me to create balance between those two realities, two layers. So first one, this literal documentarian true presence of Kristen. And second, the world of her memories, thoughts, and feelings. And thanks to this, I'm not only balancing between those literal and the unreal, but it also gives the story an interesting narrative dimension, because VR is a space that is very often compared to dreams. So by plunging into the thoughts and memories of this woman, the viewer, on one hand, identifies with them, perceives them, remembers them as we remember our own dreams and memories. But on the other hand, you can ask, what did you see? Did it really happen, or was it just a disturbing dream? and what does this disturbing dream mean for Kristen, who still lives in this reality. And one other aspect of illustrations is the style of it that alludes to the reason behind her trauma. So it's a children's room, furnished, full of clothes and full of toys. It's a children's world that was supposed to come into being and that will never happen for her. And in the end, it actually crumbles and falls apart. And the style of the illustration is a little bit childish and simplistic to address that where she's in her mindset. She's still there in this reality that will never happen for her. In the choice, I combine two aspects of thinking about space in VR. And here I could talk a bit longer about that, but I will go quickly through this because it's quite a complicated aspect. It's about how much of the space we should be using. So from one perspective, research shows that if we provide the audience with the fuller scope, so for example 360 space, the more complete the sphere, the less the viewers are actually able to assimilate information. They're not focusing on the story because they consider each element important, and they simply start being lost in what becomes chaos. And when we realized that, after some research, after some analysis, we first decided to focus attention on the woman, and we filmed her as realistic as possible, of course, but we turned off the rest of this realm, and we initially introduced just a black void. But then it turns out that the greater the use of space, the stronger the bond and understanding on the emotional level. And I can then point you to some research that was checking how it happens and why it happens. But we realized that to create this emotional understanding and connection between the audience and our character, our protagonist, we need the full space. So we cannot use the full space because it becomes chaotic, but we need it to create emotional bond. And here we came up with introducing illustrations, and those illustrations fill the space in a delicate way, and at the same time they will not obscure it, they will not create this chaos, but instead they allow me to direct the viewer's attention to specific places. So this is how we use space in the choice. And now the structure of the conversation. So the choice is a conversation, and it is branched, but to a limited extent. And it was important for me to build specific emotions, dramaturgy, like filmmakers do, and bring the viewer to the climax, where the audience is confronted with the woman's trauma, and it was important to properly prepare the viewer. So I cannot allow you to get lost in this branching narrative. I needed you to take certain steps to come to this ending, to this climactic moment prepared. And therefore, the viewer delves into this conversation, they select the next and the next question, they pave the path that the conversation follow, but there is not much of an agency in terms of shaping different endings. So the story always goes to the same point. And as a result, the viewer has a sense of making a choice at this micro level, at this level of individual questions, but I keep control of the course of history as a whole. And other aspects of building this conversation are stuff like rhythm. So to create the rhythm that would mimic the rhythm of conversation that we are having in real life. And to do it, there are various lengths of the questions and answers. We sometimes use one question or two, and this allows me to increase the pace or the pacing or slow down. I also introduce pauses or even moments without questions, so there's silence and then you're waiting for her to start speaking again, like in a natural conversation. So the rhythm of the conversation is one aspect. Then defining the questions themselves, that was quite challenging task because they had to combine what the viewer has just heard with the next fragment, which was not always linked directly in terms of content. So how to define this question that will help me to navigate from one part of a conversation to another, but will feel naturally. And also, it was important not to suggest some emotions in the interpretations, because I assume that my audience can come from very different places and with very different mindsets. So I don't want to form the question saying, oh, that might be hard for you, because someone might not be feeling that this specific situation was hard. So that was also quite a challenge to define those questions. And then building the very mechanics of asking these questions so they did not break the feeling of immersion, so they are simplistic enough and not to introduce it like too many elements that make it feel like a game, not a conversation. And the choice has met with great interest from the very beginning of our work, both in VR community, media, professional environment. A lot is happening around the project. But what is most important to me are the reactions of the viewers. And the most important question is, does it work? And screening and conversations with the viewers show that indeed something interesting is happening here. So the results of the choice have been actually much bigger than we initially expected. We were showing it to people who are anti-choice and who often end up in tears in the end after watching it, saying that they have never thought about the issue this way. And we also have people coming back to us months later, months after watching, and they say that they're still thinking about it and they have changed how they think about these issues. So I hoped that this will work, but I didn't know if it will. And testimonies like that were huge, huge, huge for us, because yeah, it works. And we actually decided to compare these results from showing the same testimonies both in VR and as a flat video, because I wanted to check, okay, maybe Kristen's story is extremely moving, touching, and maybe this is what works, not the VR. But indeed, there's a huge difference with how people react to flat video. I did like a basic edit with the story. But what we think is happening is that VR allows for an undivided attention, which on its own is very important. But the interactions, even if they are not very complex, you're just selecting these questions and you see your hands. But I think it makes people feel more engaged in the conversation. And then all the elements that I mentioned, so the 6COF, the presence, the proximity, they make you feel like you are talking to a real human. And there is a very strong impression of her talking directly to you, which I think is another part of this equation. And the result of this is huge, because people actually change how they talk about her. So they describe the protagonist in the language used to describe actual encounters, not the ones that we usually use to describe a movie. So they start perceiving her on an emotional, deep, and very personal level. And one of the quotes that I have for you is, one of the persons says, "I feel as if I'm sitting with her and talking, and I made a personal contact with her." And as I said, my big question was, is this medium of this or the story that affects them? But the difference in emotional response with the flat and VR video was really fundamental and made us realize that we are onto something really big here. And yes, the story is very moving, but I think that VR and our approach made it, like, moved it into another level. And it's also very interesting to me to discuss the project with people who are hesitant about reproductive rights, and it happens quite a lot. But often after watching the material, I see very strong emotions, and often I hear apologies. And as I said, I also have such reports where someone comes back to me after a few months, they're still deeply moved, and they still talk about this meeting with this woman, and they still feel the influence of what they heard on their own views. So it actually does change what they think about abortion. And this is something that I really didn't expect. Like, I had a hope that it will be moving, touching, but I didn't think that it will change people's views. And this happens quite a lot. And surprisingly, some very emotional answers I have from men. And sometimes they are actually afraid to watch it because they don't know what they see. And like this person whose quote I'm showing, he was afraid to watch it. He told me after that, but then he came back with those words. And I often have people who are, after watching the experience, they start sharing personal stories with me. And again, I have men saying how much they have learned about the issue itself, but also how now they can look differently at their female partners who went through such experience or will have to go through it. And suddenly they started realizing, like understanding it in very different way. I also have women sharing what they felt, how they felt, the same emotions that Kristen did, and nobody talked to them about it so far. And it was such a relief to be able to talk to her. So this is incredible. This is amazing. Again, this is not something that I was really expecting to happen, but it does happen. And I think it's a beautiful answer to the question of whether the method we have chosen makes sense. And seeing these amazing effects the choice has on people, it actually set our creative mindset as a company and made us realize what we want to do as a company in terms of creative and technological approach. And we see a huge chance in this approach to tackle more difficult subjects and to do it in creative and engaging way. And this is actually what's next for us. So currently we're working on a project that will develop this approach much further. It will be another documentary, and the subject is very different, and I cannot talk about it yet, but soon, hopefully. And we're also seeking for collaboration. So if you want to work with our capture method and use it for other purposes like training or education, we are very open for that. Anywhere where you need a human's presence, when you need understanding on an emotional level, I think our method and approach will work. And we're here to pretty much provide you with the unique combination of what our team offers. So we work with technology, but we are creatives. And unlike many other companies, for us, it's not the product comes first. We are filmmakers. So for us, it's the story, the message, the emotions that are the most important. And then we want to work on making it happen, of course, with the technology. So that would be, I think, it. And now let me know if you have any questions, and also please visit our website, and we can definitely talk after.
Hey there, Joanna. I do have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me? It looks amazing, and I'd love to experience it. But my question for you, because this has come up with other people I know, whatever. How do you get people who aren't already on board with what you're trying to show experience it? So distribution-wise, you know what I mean? Like getting people who, because this really should be seen by people who are anti-abortion, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you get it to them?
Well, so far I was presenting it in person at some events and festivals, and I often had a situation that somebody, actually pretty often, pretty funny situations now when I look back, but pretty scary when I first encountering them. I had many people saying that abortion is bad. I had many people saying that I'm a sinner and all this, yeah, a lot of bad things. But what I do, I talked to many people before we started presenting it. I recorded a couple of the interviews, but also as the project was growing, we have a website, we have Instagram, we have Twitter, we have Facebook for the project, not the company. And people started reaching out to me with their personal stories. And I had a lot of people calling me, like Skyping, Zooming, emailing me, and just talking about their stories. And there were so many and so different. And I even realized that, like, initially when I was starting working on this project, I was judging some of them. But then after talking to like 100 or 200 people, I don't know how many, it's gone, because I realize what I've been saying and what was the reason of this project is that it's your personal decision, and only you, the person who is having it, are able to understand the circumstances, the emotions, and it's your life. And the more I was talking to these people, the more calm I was myself about it. And then when people were attacking me pretty much, I was like, they can attack me, I don't care. I talk to so many people that it's like it's not my fight, so to say. It's like I'm just a voice for them, and I make it,
Yeah.
possible for some of the stories. Yeah.
I find it difficult because whenever you do a VR experience that, fights something, it fights racism, fights sexism, fights,
Mm-hmm.
anti-abortion, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of for good type, VR experiences. My problem is that the people who already agree with what its message are the ones who watch it or watch it,
Mm-hmm.
who experience it. I don't even know the language, but I've been trying to think through how do you get it out there and show it to people who don't necessarily agree, but need to understand where you're coming from, and they don't even start. And I guess because that's true of just about anything, TV as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
But so we
I've
had
been
these
talking
people.
about that stuff. Yeah.
So we had these people on various presentations and conferences and festivals, and what I always do is I just ask them, hey, instead of talking to me, do you mind putting the headset on and just give it a try? And usually it works. I think I've never had a person who said no. Yeah.
Really?
And then this situation happens that after actually watching it and interacting with her, it just changes them, because I think, like Tom likes to put it this way, that usually what shapes our views are media, and the message in the media is usually very, divided and strong and fighting. And what you experience in the choice is a conversation with a person, and you start seeing her, you see her emotions, and all these aspects that I talked about, the proximity, the presence. This works in a way that, like, you would not really yell at a person that is sharing such story with you in real life. It does not happen. Like, there are protesters in the front of the clinics, but I believe if you put one person with one person and just make them talk, it's a huge chance for common understanding. Even if they will not start agreeing with each other, they start understanding another person. If you have a crowd, if you have a group of 5 people, no, it's not working like that, because there's like group dynamics. But if you have one-on-one,
Yeah. No, I
it
think what
works
you did was
differently.
great. No, I love what
Yeah.
you did, and I totally see. It's harder to disagree with a person when you're having a conversation than it is with a theory. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, how do you get experiences like this to be seen by people who should see it? Not just this one, but a lot. You know what I mean? The ones that are out there for good kind of experiences. All right. Oh, thank you. It looks beautiful. I'd love to see it.
Joanne.
Thank you. So yes,
Joanne.
I will put my email to the chat. So whoever wants to see it, please drop me a line, and I can add you to our App Lab beta. Because I see some
That's great.
messages. Yeah, I see some messages popping in my private channel. I will just share my email.
And Joanne, this is so relevant. We should probably send it to the Texas lawmakers. I was just watching on the news last night, Texas has passed legislation that forces women. There's so many women that are going to Colorado and other places that they can't even accommodate them because of recent laws that were put into place. So something like this could just make such a difference.
And that's a great idea. And actually, like, when we were filming it, the situation was different. It was March last year. And I thought, honestly, after, like, we've been working on this project for like 3 years or longer, and there's a lot events, and like Ireland has actually allowed for abortion. There was very strict law, and in the time frame of us working on it, they allowed for abortion actually. Poland last year banned abortion practically, my home country, and now Texas is banning. And I'm like, I did not see this project becoming actually more and more relevant. Yeah, so that's scary.
You picked a topic, you really did.
Yeah. I liked what you said about the compassion and understanding as opposed to empathy. And it reminded me of, there was a nurse that did leadership programs for healthcare providers for COVID. And she was saying that there is a big difference between empathy and compassion, because compassion is actually empathy with an action. And I feel like, when people see and experience the presence and what you've done in this, it would help them move more toward action,
Yeah, and with the empathy, like the reason why I steer away from this word is that there were many VR experiences. I will not name them because I think they were all moving VR forward, but there was this mistake in thinking that if you jump into somebody's shoes for 5 minutes, you will start understanding this person, and you will not, because if you, for example, are becoming, I don't know, alcoholic or homeless in VR, but you're still sitting on your cozy, nice couch, and you know that it's only like temporary, you will not start understanding what this person goes through. So I don't think I'm able to make you empathize that deeply, but what I want to try achieving is make you talk to this person, and maybe this will change your mind somehow.
I think you're trying to humanize. You're trying to humanize the experience, right? It's kind of desensitization in a way. Instead of it being an abstract concept, it's a person.
Yeah, you're seeing it face to face. Any other questions? Joanne, we are really excited to see your next project.
Yeah,
So-
and I cannot talk about it yet, but it's already happening. We're already developing it, and it will be combining the approach from the choice, but we're also developing it in like, we're adding more elements and more interactivity because the subject will be different. But that's all what I can say for now.
Yeah. And then you mentioned your book too. When your dissertation becomes a book, will that be in English as well? That would be something we could.
First, we're working on a Polish version, and this is what's already happening. And then I very, very much want to translate it to English. Yes. Fingers crossed, please.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that as well. Any other comments or questions? Did Tom want to make any comments, or since he made the trek here, we should let him talk too.
I have the presentation and really love your work, John.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tom is typing. It's a great presentation.
Great presentation. It was great. I like how you are using illustrations too, so it's some parts of it, because this is such a traumatic type of topic. So it makes it, in some ways, quite not as traumatic, to help you be able to digest it rather than. And here I want to give huge kudos both to our illustrator and composer. So illustrator Zoe Rowlin and composer Janelle Bechtold, because like first version that I saw after editing was the basic illustrations, and it blew my mind how much more mental space it gives. And then combined with music, like sometimes the music gives you a little bit of not anxiety, but like unease, and then it sort of like hugs you with the moments when you need the hug, she needs a hug, and together with the illustrations, I'm like, wow, those two ladies really took care of me, my illustrator and my composer. Yeah. Great. Yeah, it takes a team, right? That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you all for joining us. Let's give Joanne a round of applause.
Thank you very much once again. And if you have questions, if you want to talk more privately, I wrote my email, so please write me an email or find me on LinkedIn or whatever, and just reach out.